Hi, this is Leonie from Spines and Splines. I was just shooting a new oil painting video and had a bunch of colour left on my palette, and to use it up rather than wasting it, I pulled out an ongoing painting from my works in progress that I specifically set aside to work on in times like this when I want to use up some leftover paint. I bought these tiny boards when I first moved to Ireland before all my printmaking supplies and materials had arrived from Australia, so that I had something to work on while I waited. They're plywood panels with a really smooth gessoed surface, and what I've been doing is painting a solar system object on one panel and a lyric or a piece of poetry on a second panel, and I plan to mount them together in a hinged frame, sort of so that they talk to each other. You could see at the start of the video that I'd started this one quite a while ago with some leftover paint from another thing that I'd been working on, and I had a fairly structured underpainting in place that had well and truly dried by the time I started painting today. It's actually been so long with this one that I'd forgotten which one of Jupiter's moons I was originally painting. And according to my Instagram account, which is @crumpart_draws, if you want to go and follow me there, it was supposed to be Titan, but I actually ended up turning it into Europa, which is the smallest of the 4 moons that Galileo discovered orbiting Jupiter. Jupiter actually has 79 moons all up, and Europa is, or 79 moons all up that we know of at this point, and Europa is the 6th closest one to the planet. One of the super interesting things about Europa is that it's very smooth, and in fact has the smoothest surface of any object that we know of in our solar system. And there's a hypothesis that Europa actually has a rock core covered by an ocean just underneath its frozen surface, and the heat from the tidal movement in that ocean helps keep it liquid. The Hubble Space Telescope has also detected vapour plumes erupting through the ice on the surface, and because of that it's one of the front runners for finding extraterrestrial life in our solar system. I'm painting this with a combination of a palette knife to get the interesting textures and some brushwork for blending and for the blacks, and also using some rags and things to pull back the colour where it's needed to give the effect of the stained surface that Europa has in the images that we've got from NASA and from space. It took me a while when I was younger to realise that not all painting needs to be done with a brush, and sometimes what you take off the surface is just as important as what you put on. Having really little inexpensive surfaces like this to paint on and projects that are essentially made of leftovers has been really useful for me in terms of experimenting like this, because when the thing you're working on is just something you're throwing paint at after you've been working on something else that you might think is more important, it's easier to relax and loosen up a bit, like there's not as much at stake, and sometimes you can end up with better projects than the thing that you had intended to make in the first place or that you'd been working on. My colours are all mixed from a combination of browns, which in this case are burnt sienna, raw umber and warm sepia. My 3 primary colours that I use to mix are Prussian blue, Alizarin crimson and cadmium yellow light, and the white that I've used in this painting, and which I use most of the time, is zinc white. I like to mix my own blacks rather than use one straight out of the tube, as mixing blacks from colours seems to make it feel a bit richer. I've also noticed that the straight blacks that I do have take a very long time to dry, and when I mix a black it dries much faster because the pigments in those colours dry faster than the pigments in the black. There are a few different colour recipes out there for mixing blacks, so look them all up and see what might work for you. But I tend to go for a combination of Prussian blue, Alizarin crimson and raw umber, and I'll also sometimes use glazing layers of colour to build up the blacks and really give them some depth. The black that I mixed up for this was looking a little heavy on the blue when I painted it onto the board. So after I'd filled it all out, I went back over it with a thin layer of alizarin crimson and warm sienna, which did the trick of warming it up a bit and making it look a bit more neutral rather than a blue-black. When I was done laying down the black background, I went back into the moon and used my blacks and my blue and my crimson to make some sort of purpley dark shadows around the edge of Europa to make it feel more spherical rather than just circular, more like an actual solid object rather than just something painted on a board. And I went back over those shadows lightly with a cotton bud to help blend everything out. And I went back with my paintbrush and sharpened up the edges for the same reasons of making it feel more like a spherical object rather than just a circle on a board. The next step for this one will be to come up with its pair, and I'm not sure what textile music I'm going to use for that yet. The first painting that I did like this was a close-up of one of Jupiter's storms, and for that I used a Simon & Garfunkel line from The Only Living Boy in New York, which was the line about the weather report. The next painting I did was of Our Moon, and I paired that with another Simon & Garfunkel song, The Sounds of Silence. But rather than using words, I used the melodic musical notation from a couple of bars from the middle eight. I'd like to round this one out with some Simon & Garfunkel as well, just so that it's more like a series, but I'm not sure what, and I'm not going to force something just because I've used it for the other ones. I also made a series of Europa monoprints last year, and those were matched with lyrics from Ella Fitzgerald singing I've Got You Under My Skin, which was referencing the subsurface oceans of Europa, so that's an option as well and one that I really like. I find that this part of the process is something that I can't really force. I just have to sit with it and let it run in the back of my mind, and at some point I'll make a connection with something I'm reading or listening to, and when the right thing surfaces, it's as if it could have never been any other way. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and picked up a few tips, whether that be on colour mixing, using up leftover materials, or coming up with ideas for new work. My Patreon, website, Facebook page and Instagram will be linked in the trousers of this video, so go give those some love if you'd like, and hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons on YouTube if you'd like to see more. Cheers!